as I have an accountability framework somewhere, but within our day-to-day tasks, per operation, per assignment, do we have someone else to look after the other person as an accountability partner? I've seen that working very, very well, and this is someone that you trust. This is someone that you know they want you to succeed and you want them to succeed. And that's the model that perhaps we need to reflect on and say, how it could be in a different shape or form that we need to bring on board to ensure that then we're getting to the right model. And this, particularly most of the Aaag offices it opens a platform for collaboration across different teams within the Ministry of Finance or Treasury or whatever the case may be. But then you need to, for you to get to three, we need to have informal ways to still drive accountability. And one of the ways is to have, I'm calling them here performing teams, but working group peer level accountability. And then now I talked about emotional commitment. Remember in the informal side, I talked about norms and commitments. Commitments are, it's important that's emotional. Emotional means, remember when you talk about culture, we're saying it's how you, what you ultimately believe. It is informed by what you do on a regular basis until that forms your belief and that informs your mindset. So emotional investment is equally important for us to have sustainable accountability culture. Lastly, I thought I would share this, and it's something that we use a lot to just reflect on where we are. And it's a circle that looks at the objectives we have, and this can be broken down per each task, per each activity, and it could be based on the plan that we have during the year, and then how aware everyone is. And this awareness starts from the very, very top. How do you then ensure you bring everyone on board through objectives and interactions with which aspires? And then we have KPIs, which are good, but in my experience, these KPIs it's something that can just end up being a checklist. If you miss the connect and engage phase where everyone is on board, you can have KPIs, but they'll not necessarily help you very much, and then it's a cycle that you iterate. A point I want to make at this juncture is to really say accountability culture is inspired. It is not coerced, it is not forced, and it requires diplomacy and tact for everyone to really get people to be accountable, even not knowing that they're actually being accountable, because they're inspired to do that. And the best way to do it is to bring them on board and be able to answer what is in it for me. That's a very important question for anyone who is looking at it. It should not just be Accountant General's agenda. How do we, I talked about alignment earlier on, how do we bring it so that they also see there is something at stake for me? So this is a quick point I want us to reflect. I'm calling it an accountability culture health check, looking at where you are. And we typically do in good governance, these are the things that we see more and more, just understanding where you are from an accountability culture standpoint. It is one thing to have a framework and a policy, but have that culture been well integrated within how we do it. So, and the focus is to identify, number two, in the middle there, what I'm calling focus, is really at critical behaviors. It could be having a conducive environment in our meetings for people to talk about even complex and controversial issues. It could be aspects of saying, how do we ensure that if there are outstanding items that are have been long unattended to, we have a platform to actually discuss them. So it's really focusing on behaviors and not on tasks. Yeah, that's a key differentiator. An effective accountability focuses on behaviors and not on, have you done this in terms of the outcome? Do you have this report or not? It's really around demonstrating behaviors that then lead to that report. And this health check will help you to do that. And then now how you enable and measure, much as you'll still come and measure, but then you're measuring behaviors. You're measuring those subtle steps that will help you drive accountability. So an important takeout for me is for us to then say, and I think I've mentioned that, different schools of thought, which is a really conventional wisdom. Change mindsets, vis-a-vis changing behavior. It is very difficult to change a mindset because mindset has been built over a very, very period of time, very long period of time. You better off identify behaviors that you can change. Even at the bottom here, I'm saying, okay, it's a quote I've borrowed. It says it is easier to act your way into a new way of thinking than think your way into a new way of acting. So doing smaller things that really help people remain accountable for one another first, and then that culture grows to become an organizational culture. You don't need to have everyone on board at the context of organization to ensure then that they help us model what right cultures are to then drive accountability. So changing behavior becomes very, very important to actually achieve that and have it in a sustainable manner, as easy for people to just shift even without knowing. So you'll know your KPIs finally, everything seems to be working, but it's because we've actually engaged and the behaviors are almost part of what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. Yeah, so I'd like to just pause there and bring this to a close so we can open up for discussions. But the challenge really is a shift. Yes, commitment to one another. That's very important. It looks like a very agreed what needs to be done. How do you hold one another accountable? And that then calculates to then the institutional goals and how those goals can be achieved. And in this way, then you have an opportunity of, and then accountability just becomes an output of an evolved culture. And that's really the paradigm we want to be embracing. And I know it's a challenge, particularly in a lot of institutions where we have a certain way of doing things over time, and the governance that you have should be the pillar then that helps you drive that. So allow me to pause there and hand back to Mr. Khan, and then hopefully we'll have an opportunity to interact and share more and hear from different teams and different views.
Can we please extend another round of that? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I'm sure you all would understand the importance of culture. What Benjamin has brought us this morning is a very different view, legal framework. We look at the accounting framework, and we look at the systems to drive accountability. What Benjamin is bringing here today is how do we drive culture and build effective teams to drive accountability. And he's made quite an important point, investing in. With that being said, turn to my colleague from Malawi, Mr. Idrisa Mwale, and maybe just for him to share some of his views on how culture has really driven accountability in his sector.
Thank you so much, Chairperson, and thank you for the presentation. I agree with the Chairperson that the dimension of accountability that has been presented in here. Now, looking at the fostering a culture of accountability in public institutions, I want to build on what has been presented, but more focused on the area that I'm quite familiar with. That's working with the parastatal hold each other accountable. So we first have to recognize, as you said, that situation. Each one has to take a part in the contribution and delivery of the mandate of an institution, but also show that the initiative that we have to do to get there. In our aspect, we also know that we cannot work in silos. We work as a team. So what we do is to, first of all, engage with the executive management of these parastatals so that they recognize what their core business is. And once they recognize their core business, they are supposed to come up with the targets, which are also include financial management, in which we also look at PFM activities. We also look at corporate governance. Governance issues that were raised in here are part of accountability that we have to bring so that we are accountable to the populace. We also look at issues to do with recruitment. That's, again, is part of accountability. Who are the people that we are recruiting? All these areas are part and parcel of the issues that we have to internalize in the institution. So we produce the performance targets for these institutions. Going further than that, at an institutional level, we also recognize that these institutions are supposed to be accountable to the government. So in Malawi, the Office of the President Cabinet sets performance targets and goals for each and every parastatal, which are signed, and they're supposed to be reporting to the presidency office. Besides that, we also have the shareholder letter of expectations. All these are instruments to promote accountability. In these instruments, we look issues at financial allocations, use of these resources, and what are the targets that will be achieved. The shareholder letter of expectation is signed between a particular parastatal and the Minister of Finance. The Secretary to the Treasury is the one that signs these documents. So whatever is contained in these performance targets, as well as shareholder of expectation, are brought into a performance assessment of a particular institution, and each officer is accountable to the delivery of these targets. So they cascade their individual targets from these institutional performance targets. We do this so that, as said, we have a clear expectation so that everyone is responsible to the delivery, and also that each and every individual has specific tasks to perform in the delivery, and indeed as being accountable on what they are doing. And fourthly, this helps us to keep track of who is supposed to do what, when, and how. The Ministry of Finance avails resources to ensure that these are delivered in accordance with what has been set as the targets. These are some of the things that we do in Malawi. Going further than that, Chairperson, allow me also to indicate that we also have some legal instruments that also contribute towards accountability, fostering a culture of accountability. We have the Office of the National Audit, which looks at the social resource allocation, conduct independent audits on how these resources have been used, in line with what was agreed in the shareholder letter of expectation, but also identify areas where there were irregularities. We do also have the Anti-Corruption Bureau that also plays a role when there are issues that have been brought up. They do also conduct investigative exercises, bring public awareness, especially when it comes to procurement. They are also actively involved to ensure that we are being transparent and accountable on the use of these resources. Chairperson, these are some of the areas that I thought I could talk about. Coming to the Department of Statutory Corporations, we also ensure that we have the right institutions, right bodies in place to run these parastatals with the mentality or with the background of promoting accountability of public resources as well as use of such resources. I can end here for now. Chairperson, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Umwali, for so I think Malawi has quite also a unique approach towards accountability, and I think some of there's some commonality across the continent when we look at the setting of developmental goals, targets, etc. But as he's indicated, that setting the right targets is quite a fundamental pillar towards driving accountability. I'm just looking for my MC. I just need to know how many minutes I do have. But what I'd like to do is, considering we just have one discussant, I'm going to deputize as a second discussant and perhaps maybe share very briefly a South African perspective and then open up to the floor for questions. South Africa has just come out of an elections. It's the 7th democratic administration that we've moved into earlier on in the year. And one of the key goals that's been set is building a capable state. And why I'm amplifying and raising this is that building a capable state really relates to what Benjamin has articulated here today. It's not just around capacity building, professionalization, but it's really about how do we drive accountability amongst the teams. We all know that we are only as good as our teams. And if we do not build the right culture in our teams and across governments, we will not be able to achieve those goals and outcomes that we so seek. So it's quite important that as we go on this journey, culture has to be a key component of what we call building a capable state. And this is quite an important element. And Benjamin, this is something that I will also take back home with quite a strong message that we need to ensure that culture is embedded as part of this strategic drive and journey as well. Colleagues, I'd like to now open it up to the floor for any reflections on how you have viewed culture and how has culture driven organizational performance in your respective teams or countries, and really for you to also share some of your reflections. And if you do have any questions for Benjamin, Idrissa, or myself, I'm sure we would be happy to take it. So I've noted 1, 2, 3, so we can start from the front, 2, and then I've acknowledged the 3 hands. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and our presenter and the discussant. I just want to build on what Idrissa has shared. Public institutions, it means they are responsible for public resources. For them to operate efficiently and effectively, and then at the end of the day, impact on the population that they are serving, it means obviously there must be a culture built in it. And in the issues of the targets and the guidelines that are drawn, and then bringing in also on the oversights, that go into these public institutions, you would find that really, in terms of alignment, they are all working towards one goal. And also, because the whole essence is accountability in public institutions, that's why I think some of the reforms have come into play in that the public institutions also must do as a government by following the guidelines, and then on the other side, Minister of Finance, and one of the reform areas is to have a single treasury account where resources that are in these public institutions, like the state-owned enterprises, which are more in Malawi, about Idrissa would confirm, I think over 200, they must all come into that government account number one, so that we make sure that the resources that the government has indeed is benefiting all the sectors. None is lagging behind. So I just wanted to build on it to say the culture in these state-owned enterprises as public institutions is really key if we are to improve on public financial management. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. Can we get the next question?
Thank you very much for your presentation on culture and accountability, and also linking the culture to how we are accountable. One thing that I looked at was on the emotional commitment being the key to the highest level of team performance and accountability. And for public sector institutions, how do we bring our culture that we reach the level of emotional commitment and all the team members have a shared value? Because in your definition, you defined culture that it's a self-sustaining way of doing things and it directs itself. So how now do we drive in public institutions to ensure that our members of staff and as teams, we have reached this level of emotional commitment and we are holding each other accountable to ensure that then the Public Finance Management Act, the laws, the regulations, and the manuals are followed basing on that emotional commitment? Thank you.
Thank you. Before you hand the mic, just your name, please.
I'm Mona Mhango from Malawi.
All the questions from Malawi. Okay.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the presenter. Chair, you started off by raising a concern. Oh, no. Yeah, my name. I thought I will do the last as well. Gaopalelo Molelekwa from Azania, specifically Mzansi, South Africa. You started off by raising a concern, Chair, that we probably don't engage more with the presentations. You raised an exception with regard to yesterday's engagement. Let me further raise an exception before I go to my questions, that probably if you give us these presentations beforehand, we will be able to engage with them more thoroughly. Going to my questions from the presentation, Mr. Mkwezu seems to be focusing, and I'm saying this with a bit of caution because I did not engage thoroughly with their presentation, but he seems to be focusing on the informal side of accountability and focusing specifically on emotions. And there is where I have got a challenge without really knowing the context of the presentation. He further says that accountability is inspired and not coerced. This gives me much more challenge because amongst us as societies and communities, and before we are accountants, we come from our communities. And if our cultural behavior from where we come from is different to the accountability that we want to achieve. Let me take an example and say, in my community, I can do as I please. How do you expect me to be then accountable as an accountant? And that is where I'm saying, I would rather say accountability emanates from rationality, where you say this is wrong, whatever your emotional status is, this will remain wrong, based on principle. And this I am basing on the fact that emotions are subjective and rationality is objective. And as accountants, we have to be objective. I thought from the perspective of South Africa, we would be given a bit of background why we are struggling. And I would like to submit to this gathering that where we are struggling and where we are heading very fast is the conflict between accountants and the auditors, where one wants to supersede the other, whilst we should be working as one. If you look at our audits, where the accountant, the auditor will want to hold the accountants accountable, there will be to and fro. Instead of arguing on principles, is arguing on the basis of superiority. Who should say the last word? In closing, Chair, if I'm not saying the Arab world and maybe Asia are perfect. My colleague was giving me an example of those two areas where they were saying, you know what to do when you come into another country because it is set in, cast in stone. That's why I'm saying accountability should at some instances be coerced, not inspired, because we will have mavericks amongst ourselves. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. There was, can we take, so we literally have 5 minutes to conclude. I'd like to take a question from the back. So I can see that hand there. And can I take that one more on that side and then we'll conclude. We may not get a chance to take all questions. Yes, that's that hand there. Yes.
Good morning. My name is Julius. I'm from Tanzania. I would like also to comment on what the presenter has just presented. What I have taken from the presenter is that I would agree with him that for me, I think why Africa is struggling, I think it is because we don't realize the importance of our mind and our thought, our way of thinking, which is from the culture. You see, he said that culture is self-sustaining. It is what you believe, the way you think, which is very, very important. Like there is a saying that to a leader, to a leader, what to think is more important than what to say. Why? At the end of the day, you are going to do what you believe, not you are saying. That is why we struggle normally, matching our words with our action. Because we seem to ignore a very important part of our life as human beings, which is our way of thinking. The way you think is very, very important. For me, when I talk to you, I don't really believe what you tell me. I will investigate you. I will ask you some questions. I want to know what you believe. Because we have, like in PFM, we have so many laws in African countries. That is why we hear that we have so many PFM laws, but practicing them, applying them is becoming an issue. Why? We have laws, but we don't believe in these laws. Like we are accountant, you are an accountant, you are supposed to be accountable, but you really don't believe in account, you are planning to steal the money. Tell me, how are you going to be accountable? It's very, very important to know that. That is why the previous person from South Africa asked a question, he said that, for me, it is emotional. Now, let me just say this. What the presenter was trying to present is not really emotional, but it is, I wouldn't say, because emotion is feeling. Emotion is like, I feel bad, that is emotion. But what the presenter is telling us, it is a very important part that forms part of us as a human being. The way, what we believe and the way we think is very important. Therefore, my question is, how would the presenter advise the leaders, the AGs, to create an environment of a culture that impresses, that allow people to talk. Because if you don't allow people to talk, you will not know what they are thinking, what they believe. So we have to create an environment that allow us to challenge one another. Like when we're in the meeting, like in the government institution, let us have an environment where people, like subordinates, can ask certain things that they think, they believe they are wrong. So allow them to ask so that you know what do they believe. Then you can later correct them. You can create the culture where we all have the same belief, and then it becomes self-sustaining at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. The last question, and then if I can kindly request it to be very brief. 30 seconds, and then we will get back to the presenters.
Hello, my name is Joseph from Uganda. Mr. Presenter, thank you so much. I have particularly picked an interest on the 5 dysfunctional behaviors towards culture. But there's some new dimension I want to bring here. You look at the hall, you hardly see a Gen Z. We are actually Generation X and probably the baby boomers. I wanted you to align your discussion. We are now bringing a lot of Gen Zs into our workplace. These people are very stubborn. These guys are not easily inculcated into our culture. I don't know how you are going to tell us. Briefly, can you actually tell us how we are supposed to handle Gen Zs as far as the culture is concerned? Thank you.
The most important question today. I'm going to, maybe Benjamin, just ask you for some of your reflections. You're most welcome to sit there. And
thanks, Chair. And perhaps I'll push some of the questions back to the team. So thank you. And I think, to me, the fact that we're discussing this way means the presentation has provoked the kind of a different viewpoint that perhaps it was important for us to say. I said we need to talk about difficult topics. So I'm happy that we have all these heated debates, and we need to lead by examples. We should not shy away from them. So I think thank you very much for the comment, and perhaps try and address a number of them. And if we have delegates from Kenya, maybe they can help us with the Gen Z, with the Gen Z comment. My sister from Malawi talked about emotional commitment, and I think it was clarified. It's really not the emotional in the sense that we want to say emotional. It's really being invested. And the question that comes to mind, and I've seen this working even in public institutions, is trying to carve it out in such a way that we answer the question as, what is in it for me? And that's probably, in my view, has been the missing link. And I know Idrissa has talked about the frameworks and the policies and the guidelines, and we have those. And I think one of the delegates has also commented. We have a lot of accountability checkpoints. But honestly, if we're to reflect, are we getting the right output, even with all those checkpoints? And perhaps that's why the issue of culture becomes important. So accountability, my colleague, you talked about accountability being an output of rationalization, and I agree with you. But the aspect of inspiration is really around the culture. Accountability culture will only come over time after we've exercised and done things differently for it then to be sustainable. So we're not necessarily saying accountability is you can do anything you want. It is very clear what must be done. But to have that culture as part of what we do on a day-to-day basis, that will work better, in my view and experience, through inspirational and not necessarily hard lines. You can actually adopt a hardline stance, and you've seen that working for a time. But for it to be something that then becomes part of what we're doing on a day-to-day basis and being accountable, I strongly believe it is something that then a cultural drive will really benefit us to attain that. And that really was the essence of saying how you do that. So the reflection is, do we then identify, and I talked about a few things we need to talk about, to look into, things like trust. I talked about trust. I talk about do not fear having discussions like these ones. someone talked about platforms to even in meetings, do we have candidness and dynamics that allow people to comment and provide feedback, and them believing that those feedbacks are actually valued. So that those are the drivers that then help having the culture above and beyond the frameworks and the legal structures and processes that we already have, which are important, because those are the measures of outcomes. But from a day-to-day perspective, I think the discuss was really to then say, are there additional things we need to focus on? The formal ones are very important. The informal bit as really hygiene issues that I think once we bring them in, then we'll have better commitment, we'll have better ownership, you will have better alignment. Because then I'm in a public institution, I know that I'm supposed to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but I'm not doing it just because the public institution desires it to be so, but I've looked at it with, there's communication that has happened in dialogue. So I know that I also am benefiting as an individual, professionally, and that's really what then drives my motivation. And that's why I think holistically that the view we're seeking to communicate. Just to confirm that I've covered. So the issue of conflicts, and perhaps maybe I can ask the chair to also comment conflict between accountants and auditors. I know it is still something that is not unique to South Africa. It's something that still, and that really tells us, because we know the accountability framework, what is the auditor supposed to be doing, what is the accountant supposed to be doing, but we still have those overlaps. But I'll ask my colleagues to also reflect on that. So even Gen Zs, on a lighter note, it is the same view that I think once they come, and we can't avoid them, we're in a situation where these are the people that we have to deal with. So do they feel that can we come to a position where they feel that they're trusted, that they can air their views, and then we are also invested in their own success? So once someone within a public institution realizes that they can achieve their own personal goals, not apart from the institutional goals, then we're winning, including for Gen Zs, even though they will not necessarily look at a very long-term view, and we need to appreciate that. There were some that will come in with a very, very long short-term view, but I think it's a new area that most of us are still trying to perfect and see how we can get them to be accountable, but also adopt the culture that works, because some of these cultures can be disruptive. You still need to have your DNA as a public institution, and there are different ways to then bring those on board. So allow me to pause there for interest of time and ask the chair, Mr. Khan, to also touch on.
Thank you so much. I've just got a quick announcement. They said due to time constraints, plenary 11 will start at 10:45 instead of 11 o'clock. So we would have to conclude very quickly in the next few minutes. Mr. Idrisa?
I think much has been said. I don't have anything to say, but just to say that indeed accounts from parastatals were moved to Treasury, and the number of parastatals consolidated is about 70. So that's the number of consolidated state-owned enterprises. Thank you.
Thank you. So as we conclude the session, I think it's important that we reflect over the last 2.5 days. Accountability comes in many different forms, and as accountants we're quite rigid in terms of what we do see as accountability. I think this morning's discussion actually brought quite a different view on what accountability is and where we should strive towards. During the course of the 2 days, we've also heard, and it's maybe also in response to the question from my colleague from South Africa, what is best practice may not necessarily be the best fit for many African countries. So it's really around getting that mindset right, because if we don't get that mindset right, we're trying to enforce a best practice which may not be the best fit in our organizations, and therefore culture plays quite a significant role. The second thing is that as Africans, we need to find African solutions. And too often because of our capacity constraints, we tend to consume a lot of what our countries in the north generally produce. So you would see there's a session around sustainabilities, and you would see during that session as well how the new standards that has come about and how the request for African countries to then adopt those. So colleagues, with that being said, I hope you guys have enjoyed the session, but allow me to also thank my two colleagues, and if we can kindly please give them a round of applause. Thank you.